Welcome to Oklahoma Gardening. Well, as you can see from the thermometer on the wall behind me, it's 100 degrees outside, and Gary Schaum, Rogers County horticulturist, is here again with us to talk about plants that love the heat. We've got a lot of them to cover today. We're at a home in eastern Oklahoma where they grow all kinds of tropical plants and other outdoor plants that will make it through the winter, ones that will just flourish this time of year in 100-degree weather. And Gary, what's the first one we're going to look at?
Well, we're going to kind of sit around some of the bromeliad plants. So the house that we're at today really does a lot with the bromeliads, so we're going to talk a little bit about those. And first one we want to kind of show everybody is, of course, the pineapple. Most people don't really realize that the pineapple is a bromeliad plant. It's one of the most common ones you'll see. Very easy plant to grow, and probably the only bromeliad that is commercially used.
Okay, now the bromeliad family is, I guess, a fairly large group of plants. Where did they originate?
Well, most of the bromeliads are in South America. Now, some of them, like the tillandsia, like we have here. This is a Spanish moss, excuse me. Right. This is Spanish moss. Most people can visualize that plant. That will grow up into Texas.
You've seen it hanging from live oaks down in the south.
You'll even see this growing on the telephone poles or fences because it's an epiphytic plant, just like orchid plants.
Okay.
It doesn't need any soil. As you can see, this is just hanging off a piece of wire.
Huh. So, well, it's hard to believe that this is in the same family as the pineapple. They don't look related.
They do not look related, but they are in the very same family, epiphytic plants. The bromeliad is not an epiphytic plant. It does grow in the soil, but it is in the same family. And as you can see, this is just hundreds of masses of little bitty miniature plants. Every one of these is a little bitty plant.
And they'll just cling on to something and live in the air.
Right, and that's the tillandsia usinoides, Spanish moss.
That's neat. Well, tell me more about the pineapple.
Okay, the pineapple. As you can see here, we've got a bromeliad, or one of the pineapples. This is a variegated form. This is also a spineless form of bromeliad, and it's mainly grown for the ornamental use. It's not really grown for commercial use. This is one that we grow for the color, and it likes a lot of light. It likes the heat and sunshine. The more light you can give it, the darker pink it'll get.
So 100-degree weather doesn't bother these plants at all?
No.
But they'd have to be brought in the wintertime, right?
It definitely brought in.
Okay. Now, if you wanted to grow your own pineapple, such as one like this, would it be possible to do that up here in Oklahoma?
Easy to do. All you have to do is
do that?
Go to the store, find a pineapple. Try to find one that's ripe so you can enjoy it later. And then just take that top off. Just break it off. Yeah, you don't even have to cut it off. Just break it off. Peel back some of these bottom leaves.
All right.
Let it set for about 3 or 4 days.
Let that wound heal over, I guess.
Exactly. It'll callus off. Then put it in some sand or some potting soil. Keep it slightly moist for 2 to 3 weeks, and it'll split.
Oh, great. And how long does it take to get a pineapple to grow, though?
About 2 years.
Okay. Now, with bromeliads in general, I guess a lot of them are grown for their foliage. Those that grow for their flowering, do they take, in general, a long time to flower, 2 years?
No, usually they'll bloom. Once you get a mature plant, it'll bloom every year.
Okay. Well, I understand the folks that are letting us visit their house today have a huge collection of them.
They have a large conservatory full of beautiful plants.
Let's go look at those.
Okay.
Oh, it's nice and warm out here, too.
It's very warm.
I imagine the plants are happy.
They do like this warm and heat because they are native to some of the warmer tropical areas of South America.
Now, this bromeliad's familiar to me.
Well, this is Ecmia fasciata, and that is probably one of the most common bromeliads that you'll find. It's in the grocery stores. It produces this nice pink bract that will last for months and months and months. And the blooms will come out. They're real pretty and blue. They don't last just a whole long time, but that pink bract will last for a long time.
So in a way, it's similar to what we see with poinsettias. The color is in the modified foliage.
Exactly.
And the actual blooms are secondary.
This is a little bit different from the one you'll see at the grocery store because this is a variegated form. It's a little bit rare. You won't see that, but it is a very nice plant. And this is also the one that they've given the name the living vase because you can see the water down in there, and we'll pour out this a little bit to kind of show that there is a lot of water in there, and that's the way the bromeliads like it. Because in nature, they grow up in the trees, the rain collects in there.
And that's how they get their moisture.
And they do have a lot of moisture. In fact, the different types of insects and frogs will live in there in the nature.
Ah, makes a little nest for them. I
Yeah,
guess.
exactly.
Oh, these are really colorful. Tell me about some of these.
Well, these are Bromeliads and Guzmanias, and they're a type of bromeliad that will take a lot lower light. Now, as you can see, they've got real pretty flowers, and we grow these mainly for the flowers instead of for the foliage because
just intense color.
they do have the intense red, orange, and yellow, and they're an easy plant to grow for the house if you give it the right conditions, and they'll bloom about once a year. After that plant is bloomed, of course, it'll die, and it'll form new plants on the side that can be.
So if you went to a greenhouse and bought a bromelia that's in bloom, after it blooms, it'll start to decline?
It'll start to decline after about a year or two. That plant will.
It's slow.
It's a slow. It will live long enough to nourish new pups, and depending on the variety, some plants will produce 1 to 2 pups. Some of them may produce 20.
Now, pups might be a term that's new to a lot of y'all. That's the bromeliad fancier's nickname for the offshoots,
For an
the plants that are offshoots,
right,
pups. It's a good name.
Uh-huh.
Well, this one back here, I think, is just fascinating, especially it complements this marble tabletop here. Tell me about this plant.
Well, this is Bilbergia, and this is variety 10. It's a hybrid, and it produces this bright pink foliage if you give it a lot of light. Now, in the house, this plant will turn green. It won't be quite as pretty, but it does produce large amounts of spikes of blooms, and it's a very pretty plant, very easy plant to grow.
Now, this looks like a large plant for such a shallow dish, and you mentioned that they're, for the most part, epiphytes. So the watering that's done is strictly pretty much into the pitchers or the vase.
Well, you do want to keep the soil moist. You don't want to water just in the top. A lot of people will think that you just want to water in the cup, but
the roots do need some water.
They do need to have moisture at the roots, and you water them about probably once a week. It's sufficient. It depends on where you grow them and how fast they dry out.
Well, it looks like she's got this in a very well-drained type of soil.
Exactly.
What would be a standard mix for bromelia?
Bromeliad's like a real loose mix, something that contains maybe a little bit of fir bark or redwood bark, similar to orchids, something like perlite that'll give a lot of looseness.
Good drainage.
Right.
So this is one grown for both flowers and foliage. You mentioned there are some that are grown strictly for their foliage color.
Right, the Nerigilias. That's probably my favorite of the bromeliad group. The Nerigilias give bright colors, and they do a lot of different designs. This one's kind of a little bit special to me because this is a hybrid that was made, and whenever someone makes a hybrid, they get the chance to name it, and this particular one is named after me, Nerigilla Gary Schaum.
Gary Schaum bromelia. How about that?
So it's kind of one of my little favorites here.
Yeah, that's nice. Now, these will bloom. I see one here that's flowering.
Yeah,
Let's show that to
This is blooming.
folks.
And it's kind of look like a little water pond in there. You see the water, and the little flowers will come right on out. Those little blue blooms will come out, and a little bit more than that, and they last for about 1 day, and then they'll be over with. But you'll see a lot of blooms come out.
Now that water looks like it would be very stagnant in there. Do you have to change that or flush it out?
As you water them, you just use a hose. We just flush that water out, and it will naturally be clean, but it would get stagnated, especially after a bloom deteriorates, then it starts to stagnate.
I guess in a rainforest type situation, it gets flushed out naturally. Now this is interesting, Gary. Are these what you would consider pups?
Well, yeah, these are another form of pup. This is a miniature type of Nerigilia, and this is Fireball, and it is another hybrid.
And they cut the center out?
Well, no, actually that's where an old plant was, and the old plant, like we said before, will die, and then it produces new pups.
So you just break that off?
Right, and this is one of those type of plants that the stolons stay on real good, so it will continue to get bigger and bigger. But if you wanted to, you could cut each one of those off and grow it as an individual. But this makes such a spectacular specimen plant.
Beautiful. That'd make a nice centerpiece, even though you've got to grow it outside in the full sun for the color, but to bring that indoors and put it on tabletop, that'd just be
had a party or something, that would be super.
Oh, yeah.
Give a lot of color.
Well, this is just fascinating.
Another
Quite a collection here.
Another really dark red one.
Now, to maintain that red color, just how much light do they have to have?
They need as much light as you can give them without burning them. Now, this being out in the greenhouse does have a shade cloth on it maybe a 50% shade cloth, but it does need a lot of light. But if it gets too hot, they will burn. Here's another Neregelia. This is a real common one, Concentrica, and as you can see, it
almost
doesn't
looks
give
like a cabbage plant.
right. It doesn't give a lot of that real dark red color, but it has this nice purple color. So there's such a large variety into the Neregelias.
Well, there's a real contrast around here, the different shades. There's one down here that in the coral or orange colors. So even though they're growing for their foliage, it's really an exciting mix of color.
Yeah, that has the light sherbet type color with a green edge. That makes
pretty.
a really pretty one. And it's like I say, these plants are so easy to grow that more people should grow them. Now, getting them to be this dark color, they're going to have a lot of light or a greenhouse.
Could they use artificial light if you didn't have a greenhouse?
Artificial light can be used on some plants, but it's real difficult to get this intense color. You almost have to have the light right on top of the plant. It's just
enjoy them much
you really couldn't enjoy it. This one here, again, is getting ready to come into bloom. And when they do come into bloom, they really intensify in color. And this has that nice lavender color, and it's a beautiful color.
Well, in nature, is that the plant's way of attracting insects for pollination?
I suppose so. I suppose so, because they don't have a real colorful bloom. And
now, these that we're looking at are all the epiphytic type plants that need extra drainage and everything. Are there any that will grow in a regular potting mix?
You know, there's a lot of different terrestrial plants, and one of them that's more common is the cryptanthus. And here's about 3 varieties of cryptanthus that we have. These are known as the earth stars, and she has these potted in a real loose mix, but they will take a regular potting mix like an African violet. And these are a plant that you can grow under lights. But there again, you're not going to get that real intense dark red color as you will if you grow them under natural light. But there's so many varieties of cryptanthus, and they're so easy to grow that
well, they're nice
people
and
ought to
small,
try.
too. It looks like you could get a large collection in a small area.
Exactly. They are a miniature variety.
Are bromeliads in general very expensive to get started in?
Very inexpensive. You know, they're not like the orchids we talked about earlier. Some of them can be very expensive, but most bromeliads you could pick up for just a few dollars.
Oh, that's good to know. And it looks like they're fairly low maintenance. How often would a plant like this have to be fertilized? Are they particular about that?
Well, the cryptanthus like to be fertilized a little bit more often. If you fertilize them once a month, that would be very sufficient.
Okay. Now, earlier we mentioned Spanish moss, and that's in the Tillandsia genus. Looks like there's an unusual one here.
Yeah, we have a real unusual one. The Tillandsias get more of the attention of any of the plants because they are so varied in growth. And most of the Tillandsias are grown like this on a piece of wood or bark or something that they can just trail down and make a nice showing.
Now, in addition to the Spanish moss that we looked at earlier, there was another species.
Tillandsia recurvata.
Okay. That throws off a seed pod,
right.
Did you explain? And that just attaches itself
the
on
seeds,
wire and all kinds
right,
of
the seeds
things.
come out and they have a little fuzzy appendage on them, and they'll stick to just about anything that's wet, and they'll start growing just wherever they touch.
That's fascinating. I guess you'd have to be careful in the states where they're native. They could become a nuisance almost.
Almost, yes. But like I say, the Tillandsias are native to the South America. It gets a little bit too cold for some of these more tropical varieties.
Now, are there any that are considered rare? These plants all look quite rare to me and unusual, but these are all from South America or Central American states. You were telling me earlier about one that is very special.
Yeah, there's an orthophytum that I'd like to show you. It was just collected probably 3 years ago, and it was just discovered in 1982. So it's a pretty rare plant. I'd like to show it to you.
Okay, let's take a look at that. Well, Gary, I guess all these plants at some point were collected from someplace in the wild, but you mentioned one that's exceptionally rare. Is this it right
Well,
here?
this is Orthophytum gherkinii. This is a new species that was just discovered in like 1982. The man who found it kind of kept this location secret because there wasn't very many, but then it was rediscovered here about 3 years ago, and 9 plants were brought back. And from those 9 plants, the owner of this plant pollinated them and grew nearly 2,000 seedlings. So they have really propagated that, and that's one of the great things about collecting. If it's done by a professional who knows what they're doing, they can come in and they can take a species that's just nearly extinct out of the wild, propagate it and get it reestablished into cultivation.
Okay, so the idea of taking plants from the wild would not be to take from, but to be able to put something back and protect them. And we hear a lot about tropical rainforest areas being depleted by development in South American countries, and plant collectors like these help maintain some species that possibly are being lost.
Exactly, because like I say, out of the 2,000 seedlings, and now you can pollinate more. And at one time, this plant was selling for like $500. It was so rare. And now you could probably pick one up for $10.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
But now what's this one over here?
Well, this is another plant that was collected from the wild. This was collected in Ecuador. This is Guzmania sanguinea. It's a beautiful thing.
That is gorgeous.
It produces, when it blooms, it produces this red coloring. Now, normally it's green, but as it comes into the flower, you can see the beautiful yellow blooms. It turns this bright reddish orange, and it's just one of the most beautiful bromeliads.
And again, once that finishes blooming, it would start to send off the pups or offshoots.
Right.
And you could get more plants.
Usually after it finishes blooming, it'll start losing a little bit of its color, and then the new plants will form around the base of the plant. This one hasn't quite started any. I thought it might, but you can take those off, and when they get about a third of the size of the parent plant, pot them up, and you'll have a new plant.
But good, the bromeliads are really an interesting group of plants. It's a group that y'all might want to consider growing in your own home if you have plenty of light.
Right. You do need a lot of light.
Well, as we leave this greenhouse, I notice over here an outstanding staghorn fern. Tell me about that.
That is staghorn. We believe it's grande. It's not growing typical to the normal grandes, but that particular plant is about 15 years old.
That is beautiful.
It is a magnificent specimen because they don't normally get that big. And as you can see, it's a one plant. The only way you can propagate that plant is through spores. A lot of the different type of staghorns will produce pups or offsets, and you just cut these off and have a new plant. But this one has to be propagated from spores.
That's fascinating. Well, we promised you all that we'd cover plants that love the heat. We've looked at some indoor plants that love the heat. Let's go outside and see what we've got out there.
Okay.
Well, Gary, I can see out in front of this house, it's a great place for a heat-loving garden. You have a stucco-covered home on a west exposure, and what else would you want to grow here but plants that love high temperatures?
It does look like something out of the southwest part of the country, doesn't it?
It really does. Now, this here is probably the first thing people think about in a garden that loves the heat.
Right, those
What
cactus.
cactus is that?
That's Opuntia arborensis. That's a common type of cactus that you'll see in Texas and in western Oklahoma. Very easy plant to grow and loves the heat.
Very carefree. Now, this one I recognize traditionally as an herb, this Artemisia down here.
That Artemisia really gives a lot of good contrast in color.
Oh,
that gray blends in with this type of landscape.
Very soft foliage.
Very easy plant to grow,
this purslane is gorgeous. Tell me about this one.
Purslane is one of my favorite bedding plants. You know, it loves the heat. It has these beautiful blooms, and every morning you'll have these blooms that comes in all colors. That's what makes it so neat.
In recent years, we've seen these in hanging baskets at garden centers, and if you've got a place where you want a hanging basket, but it wouldn't take the heat with some of the more tender plants, so purslane would be a good choice.
That's an excellent choice, and it's so easy to start. You know, that little cutting that I just broke off, you just stick it in the ground and it'll root. You got another plant.
Now, these aren't perennial, are they?
No, they're not perennial. They will die out in the winter, but you can take a few of those into the greenhouse or house and bring it back out.
Great bedding plant for the heat. Now, is this some more of that rare bromeliad that we saw?
Right, that's an Orthophotum gherkinii, and she's brought those out and made a nice bedding plant out of them.
Yeah, they make a nice border along here.
Some of them do real well. You can see the variety. These are all seedlings. Some of them don't like the heat quite as well as other ones because you have 3 plants here, and they're all seedlings, and they're all responding different.
Sure. Now, the yuccas, probably a lot of you have in your backyards. They'll grow in either sun or shade. Tough plant, and it's a nice accent plant for the front of the house, such as this.
They're wonderful for a area that you can't grow anything else.
These blooms are just outstanding, too.
And the thing about white blooms in the summertime is it kind of gives you the feeling of coolness.
It does.
Even out in the hot sunshine, the white just gives you something for the landscape.
That's really outstanding. Now, after this finishes blooming, you'll want to go down in here with some pruning shears and cut that stalk off, because it can be unsightly having the stalks remaining there.
That plant will last pretty much a couple of years, but it's kind of like the bromeliads. Once that plant has bloomed, then it's gone, and then it'll produce some new plants on the side.
Some side shoots, yeah. But they really are nice. Well, now, there are a few more flowering plants around this home, I understand, that really love the heat.
They do like the heat, and I think we ought to go look at them.
Okay, let's go take a look.
This is a nice container plant. This is alamanda, a beautiful tropical plant that you can put out on the patio during the summer. It loves the heat.
Oh, it's an intense yellow. This is beautiful.
It'll bloom all summer like this.
And here it is the middle of August, and this is doing extremely well just out on the patio.
Exactly,
like
and you see the buds coming, so it'll bloom all summer long. In the wintertime, you just have to kind of trim it back a little bit and bring it inside. It makes a...
Now, if you didn't have a greenhouse, could you put this in a sunny window through the winter?
Yeah, you could put it in a sunny window because it tends to go a little bit dormant during the wintertime anyway. But it makes a wonderful container plant that you can just set out on the patio and enjoy.
That's great. Over here we've got wisteria. It's unusual to see a wisteria in bloom in the middle of August, but we understand that this plant's a little unusual that way. It blooms later than some of the others you may have seen. A lot of you probably visualize wisteria looking this way ultimately, but you might in your own yard have ended up with just a mounded mess. One thing we want to emphasize is that you really have to have some kind of a structure for it to grow on. And Gary, it looks like they built a pretty stout little arbor under here.
This is a nice arbor.
Another thing to keep in mind is that wisteria requires severe pruning every year to keep them in shape. They'll grow into your house, they'll tear buildings down even because they're so vigorous. So you want to keep them pruned back. And a lot of times, young wisteria plants take many years to come into flowering. So,
this plant's about 10 years old, but it was a large, old plant when it was set out.
Well, that's the secret to getting them to bloom right away, I understand. Huh. Now, I understand around the pool there's some things to look at.
Yeah, let's go look.
Okay. If you're selecting plants around the poolside or any water feature that's out in the bright light, you've got to remember that there's a lot of reflected light. It usually tends to be a very open, hot area. And do we have a plant for you?
This is a wise choice plant for this area.
This is Cassia alata, or candlestick plant, and it has to be grown as an annual in Oklahoma. You need to start from transplants. Some people sow the seed in March indoors and then set them out usually late April, early May.
After all danger of frost is over.
Right, as soon as it's warm. And in another month, these will have a nice big yellow spike of flowers. But for right now, we're enjoying this foliage. It's just beautiful. It gives a great tropical air to the poolside.
Another plant down here that'll take a lot of heat is the Agave Victoria Regina. I'd like to show that. It's a really cactus-type plant. It's takes the heat, full sun, and you can just bring it outside in the summertime. It makes an excellent patio plant.
That's nice. It's almost sculpture looking.
Right,
it's like a piece of sculpture. Now this is an unusual hibiscus, Gary. Tell me about this plant.
Well, this is a variegated hibiscus, and another plant that's going to take the heat and do real well is a container plant. You just set this outside during
a variegated one. Right. Y'all may have noticed our red hibiscus in the Oklahoma Gardening Studio garden, and to me it's a greatly underused plant for summertime that you can set out and then take in again in the wintertime. It's a great hummingbird plant too.
Right behind you, you see some of the double forms of it. Makes an excellent.
Oh, that's nice. Almost looks like peonies. This one does.
They make a beautiful plant.
That's really lovely.
Here's one that produces a yellow bloom. I think I'll go ahead and snap this off. The thing about the hibiscus is they are beautiful, but the blooms just last one day.
That's true.
But it does bloom all summer long. New blooms come on every day.
You might mention that they do need plenty of water, plenty of organic matter as well. And there's one last thing that we want to show you here, and that's a fig tree. It's one fruit planting you might not have considered for your own garden, and it really does love the heat.
Right.
If you want to grow an edible landscape, think about growing a fig tree. Now, in most parts of Oklahoma, the fig will grow, but it will die back each winter because this is a southern plant. It can't take our winters completely. In fact, all of this growth you see has come up since this spring. Now with figs, you usually won't see flowers on them at all. What you see is the fruit developing. And if you look on up this stem, the fruit first starts out in the leaf axils as a little bud. And as we work our way down, you can see it getting a little bit larger, a little larger. And here are a few that are developing, getting up to about the size of a golf ball finally. And usually around the end of September to mid-October in Oklahoma, we'll be able to harvest figs. A lot of times it's a race to get them in before the frost because they will be damaged. Now with figs, you can get them started just by taking a cutting and rooting them. If you're in far northern Oklahoma or in western Oklahoma, you'll need to cover the plant over in the wintertime, mulch the area completely so that the roots don't get killed out. The top will die down. You're going to need to mulch it heavily. Figs in general like high nitrogen, lots of organic matter, plenty of water, and a lot of mulch. But they will produce some fruit for you, and it's a pretty accent plant. So if you're thinking about edible landscaping, you might think about growing a fig. It'd be something exotic to have in your yard this summer.